So again, welcome everyone.
Thank you. Hopefully you can see my slides. I'll try and keep this in 10 minutes. We're doing a lot of work at Manchester Game Centre around games and the environment, climate change, sustainability. But I'm just going to focus on two things that come under the umbrella of the strategies project that Sonia already mentioned, which is Horizon and UK government funded 4-year project that looks at the game industries as a cultural and creative industry, very important industry within Europe, and how, on the one hand, it needs to be supported to make sustainable transition, but also how it can also support wider society largely through the way it communicates in games. So I'm just going to focus today on the bit of the project that is about how we're tackling university level education for those who are involved in, they may be on game development programs, game design programs, even game studies programs, and they're university students, and they're going to be the next generation, or either in the industry or working in policy, or they're going to work in academia. So our focus in this little bit of the project is on supporting that next generation through improving the sort of training offer that they get at universities. So we've got a couple of things that we're doing. First is we're using a method that we've developed through our own research, the hacking method, and that is something we're trying to embed into the higher education academic training for students. And we're also going to produce an open source training tool that's specifically for university programs, could also be adapted for incubator programs and other training programs, but specifically for university programs, that will become a scalable resource. So I'll explain a little bit about that as well. So first, I mentioned this hacking method. So my colleague and I, Paul Wake, we've been doing work since about 2020 using game hacking in climate change research. And we've done it at all sorts of levels. We've done it with very young people. We've done it in academic settings. We've done it with participants at festivals. And the idea is we're moving away from game hacking as this sort of ideation tool, which is often used in kind of game jams and things, to a mode of fostering critical literacy. So when we do game hacking, we're asking people to interrogate the way the game's making them play it. We're asking them to interrogate design patterns. We're asking them to interrogate the stories the games tell. And we're also kind of questioning, what are games really? Often they're presented to us as products, right, that we consume and play in a particular way. And our hacking method is really about sort of opening that space to more critical reflections. So it's very participatory, it's action oriented. So it's a kind of research that leads to kind of change in a particular organization or a school or in a particular community. And it's about unleashing the sort of more disruptive elements of play. We talk about mangling and mayhem, and particularly when we've done it with young people who are climate activists, rather than sort of the standard model, which is let's play a game about climate change and we'll all learn about climate change, as kind of depositing knowledge in young people through games. We're sort of challenging that model. So that's a part of our work. The other part is this carbon literacy training. So we are creating some very industry specific training for game developers of the future. We want to encourage rollout of this standard training across game studies courses in Europe through our strategies project. And it confers a carbon literacy accreditation, which means that students coming from these courses into industry will have an accreditation in carbon literacy, and they will also have made a commitment in their own lives and in their kind of work lives to making a difference. So carbon literacy training we didn't invent this, it already exists. It's a collaboration between the Carbon Literacy Project and Manchester Metropolitan University. It's training that anyone can do. We've done it with councils, we've done it with businesses, we've done it with students and universities. And it's basically getting anybody to understand causes and impacts of carbon emissions and to get people to make tangible, actionable changes in their lives. In order to make a difference. We do it in organizations, like we ask people to examine their own personal carbon footprints, and then we talk about the organization and we look at how the organization can make changes. And at the moment, the training that we do is very generic. It's kind of a standard carbon literacy training that's accredited, and people complete it and they get this accreditation. And we've done it with hundreds of thousands of people across the UK. So it's a very well established, effective form of training. So as I've said, it takes people through the science of climate change, very basic information. We never underestimate how much people don't know about the facts, although plenty of people know lots. There's very variable knowledge out there. Although we use the language of personal carbon footprints, we're very aware that there's issues around that. So we put that in the context of national carbon footprints of different socioeconomic groups, and we want to put energy consumption into a global context. So part of the training involves comparing the outputs of different countries and looking at the inverse proportion of the countries that emit the most and those who are most vulnerable to climate change. So it's very climate justice focused, and it's very focused on those who are most vulnerable are actually doing the least damage. And we want to highlight that right at the beginning of the training. We move from that to people identifying actions in their own life, and then to brainstorming how they can make a change within their specific organization that the training's taken place in. And a final part of the training is about advocacy and communication. So it's giving people tools to be able to talk about this with their colleagues, with other people in their industry, to be able to make a good case for making maybe what might be a difficult change in their organization. So we're also giving people tools to do that work as well. The part of the reason we do the training, and this is a slide from it, is the massive gap. So this is the chunk at the bottom here, the Paris compatible C carbon budget, is like where we need to get to. What we at the moment, what we think we know how to do gets us to a carbon budget that's more than that, and what we can practically deliver is way more than that. So we're so far away from being able to reach the Paris Agreement carbon budget at the moment. So the reason we do the training is to sort of try in some way to address this gap through education, through tackling behavior changes at personal, organizational, societal levels. And it's we see it as being part of the research, innovation, and education work that needs to be done to reach that Paris budget. So the training that Paul and Rachel and Jane and I are making is building on this existing training, but we are embedding industry context and information into it so that it's really relevant to the students who are going to be going on to work in this industry, or going on to do policy, or going on to work as academics looking at games. So we want to understand the scale and sources of carbon emissions in the game industry. So we take data from different studies, from our own researchers within the project, and we start to examine what are the sources of emissions. We explore the whole value chain, upstream and downstream, and we want our students taking the training to consider the whole process of game development. So making decisions about what kind of game to make in the first place, right through to marketing and sale and decisions made at that point. We've got a big focus on sustainable travel. Those of you that read Ben's work know, and if you look at the data, you know that if for game developers, at least, one of the biggest emissions they can own is their travel emissions. Of course, there are other emissions involved in manufacture of devices and things like that, but in terms of actionable kind of changes, we do a big focus on sustainable travel in the work. And we also get our students to critically examine the existing reporting strategies. So we look at some CSR reports, we look at some sustainability reports, and we get them to look at what are companies reporting, what are they not reporting, where are the gaps, how do they present the numbers, and like how is it framed. We look for greenwashing, we look for good practice, and we get them to really be critical of these industry reports, not in order to be critical of the industry, but to look at how they might make a change when they start to work in that industry. And then we're also considering that footprint handprint relationship. So there's a lot of claims made about the good that games can do in terms of climate communication. So the training looks at it, if we are going to be advocates for a sustainable transition in wider society, what do the games need to look like for that to happen? So there's a lot kind of packaged in this training, that we are delivering. So I should say at the moment, we're on V1, version 1 of the training. We have taken our basic flavor carbon literacy training and we've inserted some industry activities and context and information, and we've taken it to the Strategy Summer School in Warsaw and done an initial evaluation on that version 1. We're then going to move to version 2 to incorporate further industry specific materials. And we're going to do a bit more collaboration with the SGA on that, because you guys have got a lot of resources that, you know, we could turn into educational resources. So we're looking at kind of the best way to share the work that we're all doing. Two things we're looking at doing. The first is considering how our hacking method, our game hacking method, can be better deployed in the training itself. So at the moment, the two strands are separate. One is very much a kind of research methodology, and the other is a training. But we think that the hacking method could actually enhance our training. So we're looking at how game hacking can itself become a sort of advocacy or communication tool. So that's one thing that we're working on. And the second thing we're working on is workshopping version 2 with students currently in these programs in the UK and Europe. And then once we've workshopped that second iteration of the training, we'll validate it through our carbon literacy project sponsors. And then the final thing will be to run what we call a train the trainer event here in Manchester. So anyone who wants to become a carbon literacy trainer and take this and run it in their own institutions can come to this event and get credited as a trainer. So that will be the final sort of plan. And that's our project. So if anyone's got any questions, I'll be really happy to answer at the end. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chloe. There was actually already one question.
Oh, I can see the questions. I just pulled them up. Thank you for those. Yeah. So Jan's report on hacking events. I will post in the Discord our publications that we have so far about how we've done hacking in research projects. We've just finished an article for behavioral sciences. Actually, it's a more expansive kind of rundown of how we've used it in our research. But everything I've got, I'll post in Discord. So that and we're aware that there's other work out there that's quite similar to what we've been doing. So it's great to know that you're also doing it.
Thank you so much, Chloe. I would love to hand over to Patrick.
Okay, fantastic. Let's see if the screen share works. And you see a presentation. Yes, no, maybe? Fantastic. Great. So yes, so happy to be here. Yep, my name is Patrick. I'm going to be talking a little bit about partly our book that we've been working on, but also for today specifically about games in education, discuss a little bit the relevance of talking about systemic sustainability and how that, in our experience, to working with students, needs a safe space to really have these sort of conversations in a way that doesn't immediately really push people down a sort of stark hole of climate anxiety. I'm super excited to be here as well. I think this is a great initiative, and making connections with others about these sort of topics is basically anyways an outcome of my talk. So I think this is a really, really cool thing to arrange. Yep, so I am a researcher and game designer in the game design department at Uppsala University. I have normally a PhD in media and communication studies before that. This is me and my family last year traveling in the south of France, where we drove with a caravan, which was mildly insane, but yeah, we made it back. So this is us outside of the classroom and dealing with sustainability questions. If you want to know more about my PhD topic, by the way, there's a TED Talk somewhere there about World of Warcraft and co-creation. But since then, most of my work has been focused on these questions of sustainability and sustainability in game design and game design education. I want to start with a short story that I would like to tell you. This is a story about one of the game jams that I will be discussing a little bit more, and that was the last one that was running in Skövde in Sweden, where we had a young game developer come up to us as faculty, and she started discussing how in her company they were making this really, really cool sustainability game. She was super proud of it. It was a really, really nice conversation. However, we had just had that talk, that introduction lecture that I will sort of hint at in a second about systemic sustainability. And that conversation soured a little bit when she mentioned that, yes, her studio was super cool, the game was super cool, the people were amazing, but she was also aware that her studio was part of a suite of small indie studios that were founded by Meta, the company behind Facebook, to basically lobby the European Union against releasing more systemic and more widespread legislation around the limitations of platform companies and having a more sort of firm hand in sustainability regulations that would systemically address this entire industry. So her knowing that the work that she was doing as a designer, with putting her sort of heart and soul into that, was still part of sort of a broader greenwashing effort of this sort of big international corporation. That was something that didn't really sit right with us, of course, right? That felt really, really bad at that point. And one of the things that I wanted to get to and see if that is something that we can sort of include in our thinking is that this doesn't happen to my students anymore, right? So that we can also in our way of thinking about this address the systemic elements that have to do with sustainability questions here. This Game Jam in this case was part of the Nordic Alliance for Sustainable Gaming. And here we had 3 game jams over the summer with Nordic students and Nordic faculty coming together and working on this. And I hope that we will find another project like this in the future as well. I was giving the intro lecture for that, and that was very much based on the United Nations Making Peace with Nature report that highlights the importance of system-wide transformation to deal with the climate catastrophe that, and I just really like this sentence here, a system-wide transformation, the transformation will involve a fundamental change in the technological, economic, and social organization of society, including worldviews, norms, values, and governance. So we have the United Nations telling us that we need to address this broadly, right? So working backwards from this, I developed or we discussed something that would be a meaningful frame for sustainable actions in the games industry. So this would mean that meaningful action in the games industry for sustainability would be collective responsibility and action. It would aim for material change, go beyond and resist greenwashing and really work towards the systemic here. You're starting to see how this sort of intro lecture for Game Jam students becomes a little bit heavy, right? And to not only leave it with that, we also briefly discussed the connections to how the world's richest people are potentially not at all sitting in the same boat with us, but can escape the consequences of climate change, something that Chloe sort of alluded to on a more systemic level already, right? The climate impacts will hit more harder in areas with lower socioeconomic power and privilege, but sort of the top end of that, the 1% completely escaping it. We discussed the need of the games industry for conflict minerals that are oftentimes produced in colonial and exploitative settings. Right here, coltan mines in the Republic of Congo. We discussed work conditions in the factories that assemble the structures, the technology that we're using, the burnout cultures in games and gaming, and including, of course, the sort of longest time that our devices will spend somewhere in an e-waste landscape, again, somewhere in the global south, and ended up mentioning the military entertainment complex and the ways in which games are also sitting in the center of a structure that normalizes this colonial exploitation, right, leading back to paying the warlords that are forcing people into mines with guns, right? So this is a heavy talk to open a lecture with, and really sort of the darkest part that we have to offer. The other thing that sort of confounded that we felt is that we also saw that many of the students that came to us and wanted to work with sustainability had been low-key gaslit by previous educators or family members already. And here we found also that this was partly something that was gendered, that oftentimes female students that were participants in our courses had male family members, parents, their father, older brothers, or even just people, teachers, educators that should be people who you can trust, tell them that they are stupid or naive for caring about sustainability at all, that they shouldn't bother because this was a fool's errand, and had been sort of coming into this effort not really sure whether or not they were in the right place, how somebody would meet their worries or their fears or their very real concerns about this sort of situation at all, right? So stories about, yes, sure, as a student, you can go to the Friday for Future protests, but really it's young people's fault. They want a new phone all the time and they are destroying the planet. That sort of stuff from a teacher, or similar stories from older brothers or parents. So that really showed to us that, yes, we needed to create a space where our students, on the one hand, get to see the full picture that has to do with all of these sort of complicated intersections of sustainability and the climate catastrophe and games, but also can feel safe about it and working with it. And it worked pretty well, right? Sort of on this game jam, we got games that were made about disarming greenwashing as a sort of structural thing. I have some of them here because some of them I snatched the analog prototypes. So we have, for example, a game where you are playing a marketing team that is pitching to use your latest greenwashing terms on like a product that the other player is like pointing out. So here, one of the players would play this gaming chair, sort of, yeah, pitch me that. And then the others would like, okay, so what cards do we have available? So we can say, yeah, this one is degradable, or it's produced without harmful chemicals, like sort of greenwashing slogans taken from real products, put into the game so that you can now, as a player, see how nonsensical these claims sometimes become and sort of step behind the greenwashing. We had a game that was targeting this question of the ultra rich here, where similarly to the first one, you were playing as a marketing or the PR spin doctor, trying to explain to an angry crowd why you are richest person on the planet shouldn't be the one that should be made responsible for this. So you got, as a player, details about one of the richest people on the planet, and then needed to sort of spin their misdeeds in a way that now we could sort of see that particular person in a positive light, and somebody else would get, you know, eat the rich. That was the game. Yeah. So really, really cool stuff coming out of this. We had playable games about the tragedies of the commons and fishing, about material and systemic ableism in society, about pervasive sexism in the tech industry, multi-species farming mechanics, and even a LARP about playing different people in a town in Iceland that is getting displeased by a lava stream coming its way. So some really cool stuff that is really taking the step beyond being or making the next recycling game towards addressing these sort of systemic perspectives. So our takeaway here is that it's okay to bring up the difficulty and the enormity of these topics and sort of play with full difficulty mode, but it requires giving these sort of students then a shared value where others are living sort of in the same headspace and an honest conversation about this, and then funnel the sort of energy towards making together. Because doing something together and making something together really shared was, in a way, the antidote to this darkness, because you could do something and you could become active in a way. The last point that I want to bring up that has to do with this setting specifically is another worry of our students is like, how can these critical and quite radical perspectives be useful later on in our career? Is this something that is relevant or useful in the games industry at all? So here, highlighting something like the Environmental Game Design Playbook from the IGDA Climate Special Interest Group, or the sort of work that SGA is doing here in these sort of settings is invaluable, because it shows also to students that these sort of interest, this work, and dealing with these sort of topics is something that is valued in the games industry, that everybody else also sees as important, and that sort of really helps resist this gaslighting, telling them that this is like an effort that you shouldn't put any interest in. And I think it's important to lift these sort of voices in order to create a safe space to really be able to deal with systemic sustainability. These are my sources for this, and I'll put them into Discord. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick. I don't know, like there is a reason why I kept the academic events separate from the industry events, because like I really love it how you yeah, like basically are honest and speak up. I think it's very, very important. And I actually wanted to, like, I have a question before I ask like others to ask questions. How do you create the safe spaces? Because like I think it's of course also important for students to know that there is a industry pressure of, you know, how do you phrase things, how do you show that it is something which is valuable for the industry, but like how do you create the safe spaces so people can open up?
So yes, for these sort of events, or also in our classroom, I think part of it is sharing that we as teachers or as faculty are partly responsible for this. So taking this sort of pressure away of this is somehow their fault or something, I think that's a fairly low bar. Making it into a community where they realize that, yes, everybody else has these anxieties as well, and they want to do something, right? Sort of having a place where, like, because normally out there in the world, if you speak about that sustainability is a systemic problem that we need to address by really deeply reshaping how we build society, that is not a conversation you can ever have. So you will basically be left alone with these feelings and the sort of stress that comes with that. So having a place where, yeah, so we do agree on that. We are here with you and we would like to help you figure this out. That by itself was already really, really powerful because it made it so that, yes, we are in some way, at least here an in-group, seeing these sort of problems and partly the insanity of this, and we can try to see how we can deal with this and address it together. So I think that was a really big step towards that, making that sort of institutionally from early on by one of the teachers clear that, yes, we agree with you. Yes, we feel the same way. Yes, we are trying to approach this together. So sort of trying to humanize it and offer empathy and offering a space where you can, for once, honestly, really sort of talk about these issues. I think that was important for us.
There is another question. So how do you avoid the problem of preaching to the choir with these kinds of events?
Oh yeah, excellent question, Sören. I'm not sure, right? Getting more or getting specifically students involved means that you will end up with a self-selection. So you will end up with students that already care, with people that already care about these sort of problems. And your question here is very, very real because bringing these sort of questions even into as a sort of mainline topic into my master program isn't something that has worked very well because some people are not interested, maybe want to sidestep the anxiety that comes with that, or just say that this isn't a topic I want to work with, and I want to respect that as well. So I am not exactly sure how to do that. I'm looking for ways of making this approachable in some ways that don't necessarily require the full sort of emotional commitment, but I don't really have a good answer to you. This is something that is still a challenge. So getting people on board that maybe don't already care about it, or maybe for understandable reasons want to sidestep the anxiety. Yeah, that's an open challenge. Chloe is raising her hand.
Yeah, thanks. It's a really, really good question. In our university, we do it by, we make the students do carbon literacy training and we embed it in all of whatever degree program they're doing, like English or drama or, you know, mathematics or engineering. They all have to do carbon literacy training at some point. And it's up to the individual teachers how they embed that in. And it always, in our department, always throws up like exactly what you're talking about. On the one hand, people very anxious. On the other hand, people going, why should I care about this? There's nothing to do with my degree. Or, you know, like, so one way we get around it is by making them do it. And then that throws up lots of challenges for us as educators, having to kind of confront those kind of questions and resistances and stuff. But it's a really valuable process because you realize you have to change how you're framing it, how you're talking to them, how are you going to engage them with when you've got that kind of resistance. And that's part of the training is kind of about that as well. So, but it's a consistent problem which you can address by making your students do something like a training unit. But then, you know, then that's challenging for you.
Okay, yeah, I mean, this is also something what we as the Sustainable Games Alliance need to address very often within the industry. And it really, really helps actually to present best practices. So people who are within the group where you would think they are not passionate, but like if you have someone speaking up from like the group and presenting, this is what like you can do, and this is the benefits which are coming with it, then this is something what like helps. So maybe if some students can present on how they got rid of their anxiety or how they think it still will make them like a good employee in the future or something, I don't know, or valuable, that might help maybe.
Yes, I have a last question. Let's attempt to answer this, right? So yeah, like some of the, like showing that we are here as people who care about these issues in industry or in research, I think is super important, because I think there's this image that I will be too radical, people won't like me, I cannot use these sort of skills. So showing that this matters is important. So in that, for example, Katie, who's also here as a PhD student, right? Like I will try to, if or arrange a guest lecture, right? That would be something that shows my students that, oh, there's an actual path forward. There's actual people doing this, because right now in many places, I think we are just invisible, and we need to show more that this is something that you can do, that you can work with, that makes sense. And I think then some of this reluctance will also go away a bit, because there's role models. So just being visible in the spaces is something that's super valuable.
Awesome. And before continuing with Sonia, I would like to ask Ben to introduce himself quickly, because like he is basically the one who's developing the standard of the Sustainable Games Alliance, and he did not get the chance to introduce himself in the beginning. I hope he's still there, because he's
yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks Maria, and thanks Patrick and Chloe. Those were really, really great presentations. I'm so excited about the work you're doing. Yeah, so for those of you who I haven't met before, hello, nice to see so many of you here. It's actually like kind of incredible to see a gathering of academic researchers interested in games and sustainability that fills out a room of 50 people. Like when I started the work that became the book Digital Games After Climate Change, I could find like there was probably people that, yeah, I couldn't even count them all on one hand. That was how many people were kind of into this topic. So yeah, I'm so glad that everyone else is like picking up the torch and kind of running with it. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say. It's super great, and yeah, thanks for the awesome work that you're all doing.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ben. We have 37 minutes, so I would like to now give the word to Sonia with her example.
Right, thank you, and thanks Ben for introducing yourself. You know that you are an ongoing source of inspiration and knowledge for many of our students as well. Okay, let me share the slides. And okay, what do you see? Do you see the notes, the notes, or do you see like the main?
The main screen.
The main screen. Okay, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because I have two screens, and I know 2 years of teaching in the corona, but still, you never know which screen is actually showing for the people. Okay, so not to lose time. So as I said, I'm a professor for media and game studies at the Cologne Game Lab, but the students that I'm teaching and that I'm usually kind of working with are game development students. So I have artists, programmers, and designers. They all have to, or I hope they're happy to take courses in this kind of humanities take on games and digital media. So this is where I kind of sit in terms of eco-critical games education. I've been teaching and coming up with many iterations of what that means, or what kind of topics to discuss with my students since 2022. So that was, I think, the first time that I started offering seminars in, broadly speaking, eco-critical games education. Okay. So what am I doing right now? And also, of course, how does that feed back into the seminar room in a way? Strategies was already mentioned by Chloe. I will not talk too much about the project itself. I think just to mention what I do specifically, and a postdoc researcher on that project affiliated with Taha Köln, Ruth Dorothea Eger, who's a cultural anthropologist. We are talking to European, or in Europe, because it's a mixed crowd, to game developers. And that's ethnographic research, partially field work, interviews. Sometimes we actually visit them and talk to them on site. Sometimes it's online. How does that actually, let's say, feed back into the education, or where we see how the education maybe led to something that now is visible in the developers community? This is one of my favorite examples. This is a relatively small studio. You could say it's a micro company. I think currently 5 people. They're called Neoludic Games. They have just released their first fully fledged game, the Tiny Bookshop, beginning of August. Why are they special? These are our former students, actually, from CGL. And these are students that I was teaching those couple of years ago. One of those students was actually writing his bachelor thesis and trying to measure the energy usage of devices and, with different settings in the game engine in Unity. And so this is, to me, one of the most inspiring examples of how the classroom, let's say, kind of translates back into the practice. They told us that they are, of course, nobody asks them to do that. Nevertheless, they're doing what he was doing in his bachelor thesis. So they're actually optimizing the game, making sure that it's efficient in that way, so that it doesn't consume or require more energy than it should. There's a lot on, well, the values in that team that are also really interesting in terms of social sustainability. So equal pay for everyone, for instance. It's a small team still, regardless of what kind of role they are taking over. They kind of set this up in that way from the get-go. There are other companies, other teams that we are visiting, mostly, small Indian micro studios, sometimes companies of around 300. Also bigger studios. Just this past month, on my way through France, it was actually holidays, but I did visit Boris Manjora, who's a gameplay director at Riders Republic. I had a chance to speak to him within the framework of another project I was doing a couple of years ago, but I never actually visited. And this time I actually went there, met him in person, and we had a whole day to talk in a little bit less formal manner. And he told me a lot of things which I still have to kind of, or we with Ruth have to go through. But what was really inspiring and interesting there, he did not talk about maybe stuff that is very formal, like reporting. He did not talk that much about designing games for change. They've been doing that, but he has other thoughts that are really kind of, let's say, well, sitting very deep and kind of reflecting how the technology itself and how the video game industry should potentially change, because the times are changing. And it's when he talked about low tech, technological sobriety, third paradise. It's a concept actually coming from arts and architecture from Italy. And at some point he says, it's a matter of priority in the world of research and energy scarcities. That's a very rare sensibility. It doesn't mean that, everybody in the games industry has this kind of stance towards the world, but it's interesting to see it actually. And then again, what can I do with this, let's say, immediately in the classroom? I think these examples are just so powerful, because very often students might not feel that this is something that is in a strict sense applied or useful. But just to see that this is not only a discourse and we're having in academia, it is actually something that is also preoccupying people in the game developer community. This is another example, this time Poland, CD Projekt Red. This was a very different kind of interview. They have a small team, 3.5 people dedicated to reporting, and this is actually what they're preoccupying themselves with coming up with their own methodology. I hope they use some of the knowledge from SGA, because it looks like every bigger company tries to kind of come up with their own thing, and so data becomes incomparable. But this is more or less what we've talked about. This is a previous project that I was running, and this one was really focused solely on teaching green games in the higher educational context. I will not talk about the project itself. If you're interested, I just will point you to the website, which still has a repository of materials. I think there are maybe, there are podcasts. They're also made by students. We chose a couple of best podcasts from Cologne Game Lab. There are teaching guidelines, there are different types of exercises, and for different types of, let's say, well, you have stuff that is focused on games content, so design issues, you have things that have more to do with development there, but then also materials that are useful if you're teaching game studies, culture studies, media studies stuff. That's the games cultures and games infrastructures there. Okay, but now I have like, I think 2 minutes left. Briefly, it's if you're a humanities scholar, if you teach students, and if you want to have a little bit of a deeper reflection, it's very hard because there are so many topics, they're intertwined. Some of them are ethical and political. Some stuff is, of course, applied, how to, and if you kind of have to try to come up with, to put some order into it, at least for the students, because it's very hard to feel overwhelmed and kind of get lost. So me and Ruth have been thinking about it and talking about planetary play, and for the, there are many ways, many structures you can put on that. One of those I've been kind of thinking of is, on the one hand, thinking about playing. So play practices, play, not how we consume energy as players, but kind of developing different sensibilities in the game worlds, in the synthetic worlds. Of course, designing, a lot has been said about that already, and the the IGDA climate sig does a lot in that direction. And of course, the dark side that Patrick was mentioning, the materiality of digitality, the cost of making games, exploiting nature. So these are the broad, let's say, thematic areas that I'm kind of venturing into when I teach, eco-critical games, let's say. And for playing nature, just super briefly, what does that, or what could that be, So nature-related sensibilities, how it is to connect with technologically mediated nature in play. So when you play, this is a screenshot from Riders Republic, which is a multiplayer sports online game. It's everything but, this kind of contemplative game in itself. It's very fast. You're actually supposed to, beat the levels, but you are placed in amazing nature. And you can play it differently. And this is what I did in a it's called a Zen mode, funny enough. So this contemplative mode of being in the game world. Guess it kind of, if we wanted to work, with other people who have early on worked on games, it kind of exemplifies this, way to reconcile this kind of, deep connection to nature and the non-human world. It's Alenda Chang's work. Nature writing, this is just a reference to a work done by students in Germany of Potsdam, European Media Studies. In the Corona time, they were playing games, thinking how they feel about nature in games, and then doing the kind of nature writing based on play or on nature playing. So there's a lot of materials out there which are really very much inspiring. I am actually done with time. So designing nature, I will not talk a lot about this just pointing to, of course, the usual, suspects, one of the first suspects, one of the first groups that were working and coming up with materials that are very useful for students. This is another one of those models actually coming from the game developer community, very useful for game developer students, I think. And then, of course, exploiting nature, this kind of need to disenchant technology to show the students, hey, this is great. You can, make games that are changing maybe people's minds about something, at the same time realizing that they are a part of a larger, digital industry. And there's a lot of problems there with raw materials, labor, and, data, materiality of data. Data is very real. And CD Projekt Red, by the way, to come back to one of those examples from the company, said, if we look at the whole company, including the GOG, the platform for selling games, 65% of our energy distribution, energy production, let's say, is connected to data streaming and transference. So they're also very much aware of that. That's, let's say, a video game development pipeline. So to bring this all up and finish, I guess when we think about what it means, and why we teach, what we teach, all those different topics, I think maybe at the end of the day it boils down to exposing the students, or to allowing or giving them the space and the platform to talk and to think and reflect about their own craft of making games, and how, kind of their own human responsibility of working with that technical medium. Of course, the great stuff you can do with it, but also kind of seeing the bigger picture. And I guess that's it. And sorry for crossing the timeline a little bit.
All good. Thank you so much, Sonia. Really, thanks. Yeah. Cool.